done gigs on 3 strings. I did a gig once where the sound post, I was on the wrong side, pickups on the wrong side. It's been a journey, I'm telling you.
I had a great time connecting with today's guest, and as is so often the case, he and I have a lot of shared background. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are talking today with Kris Funn, born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, which his debut album, Cornerstore, proudly proclaims on the cover. And we talk about that, the city of Baltimore, the show The Wire, which I just had to bring up, and I think actually Kris might have brought it up first, and how realistic that show may or may not be. What his career has been like, how he got into music, the art and writing that he's begun to dig into deeply during the pandemic, stories from the road, and much more. He's a super cool artist. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practism, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's get into our conversation with Kris Funn. What's it like in Baltimore right now? Is it it's probably cooling off at this point, but I've spent some time in DC in like July, August, that kind of time. And I know it can be rough. Is it, what's it like?
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster. I'm actually like a couple miles outside of DC, but yeah, it'll be 75 and sunny. And the next day it'll be feel like 40. Right. Really?
So, okay.
Yeah, it's up and down right now. Pretty nice today though.
I think I visited. I've spent a bunch of time out there in the past. My best friend from high school lives in Annapolis, and so I'd go out and visit, and then we go into Baltimore and hang out. And I don't know if you you do a ton of things, and it'd be super fun. There's no way we're going to cover everything in this, so we got to do a round two. But do you you teach at Peabody, right? Or still do you probably, I don't know how much interaction you have with the classical folk there, but have you run into Ira Gold at all, the bass player?
I haven't, but he's such an iconic figure. I've heard his name 1,000 times. So when I do finally bump into him, it will be like meeting Yoda.
I would love to just be a fly on the wall to watch the two of you have a conversation. I think you'd have a lot to chat about. So he's a really interesting person, but man, I love this time I spent in Baltimore. I was supposed to be there in March, actually, for the Maryland Music Educators Conference, which got canceled, along with everything.
Everything, right? Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. So,
oh man, I don't even know where to start with what you do. These are totally not live at all. How's it been for you the last 6 months or so? I know I'm going a little bit stir crazy, like staring out this window, like I've done for watching my tomatoes grow slowly. How's life been?
It's actually been pretty interesting. I've had a pretty hard time, and speaking on musical terms, the hardest thing was I'm really realizing, I always thought this, but I'm really realizing why I play the bass. And I enjoy comping and playing behind people so much.
Yeah.
That this time really is hurting because, I haven't played with a live human being for 7 months, and I scroll social media and I see all my friends on bass and, they get their video going and they're playing these incredible like bass solos and solo pieces and arrangements they're making. And I'm like, I don't play bass because of this. I just want to be behind a group, being the pulse, and no one wants to see me on video, like unless you're trying to sleep. So that's been hard to try to adapt, but I've been able to do things like my first instrument was trumpet. So I've pulled my trumpet out the closet, and that's been a horrifying experience. But with all these tools and software, I'm playing piano a lot now. So now I'm just making music by myself, really. And I'll just pick up the bass last to try to feed that energy of trying to create underneath of a band. But it's been tough.
It's so weird, man. It's so weird. Like we're playing an instrument where nobody went into the bass to be the star. I don't think. It's a supporting role. It's a beautiful thing, and I think that's this reflective in a lot of bass players. But I was just on a Zoom call yesterday afternoon with 3 other people, and we did a bass. The last live thing any of us did was playing together. We did a bass quartet back in March. This great young bass player from Philadelphia, Xavier Foley, came out here to San Francisco, and he was he was playing a concert, and it was that weird time before everything got locked down, where like it was for a high school kind of age event, and the kids weren't allowed to go, but we were allowed to still do the event and film it. That sort of weird thing where, and it's crazy to think about, because like that was 6 months ago, I guess, and that was the last time I played with another human being, in the same room. It's so weird.
I did one of those bass quartet things once in my life, and it was pretty much in jazz though, right? And that was one of the times where I was like, I don't belong here. I was like, this is not my vibe at all. And like it's an interesting thing to know. Like this instrument is so amazing, but also kind of, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but it's kind of basic when you think about it, but also amazing. It's like this weird conundrum of like these 4 strings on this instrument and these number of octaves, and everybody looks at it like, oh, it's not that melodic instrument, but you can do so many things on this instrument, and you can be an awesome bassist in a particular genre or field. And then when you're putting another field, you can realize how much you need to learn and be humbled by it. And that's when you said bass quartet, I was like, I just remember it being one of those moments when I ran straight to the shed afterwards.
Yeah, this might just be my own perspective of being a bass player, but it seems to me like so many bass players end up doing other things, and you do a ton of stuff. And my theory, which it could very well be wrong, is like we're especially in an orchestral context, but I mean just in general, we're kind of like we're like observing everything, and we're laying down the roots, so we're like the foundation. And I've just seen so many bass players go into other things, whether it's conducting or arranging, or I don't know. There's something very flexible about that role. And again, this just might be my theory, but I kind of stand behind it. I think, you're a great example of that with everything that you do.
I make a joke like, bass players are so selfless people. We can do this. We give so much when we're on the bandstand and in an orchestra. We're just giving so much, and we're so disciplined. It's easy for us just to move along and do something else. It's a sarcastic joke. I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, I've been checking out everything you've been up to. One of the pleasures of doing this kind of thing is it gives me like an invitation to like go deep into your world, or as deep as I can. And it's like the more I've like listened to your stuff, I'm like, all right, we gotta do this multiple times. So but Cornerstore, and I love you got right behind you is like Baltimore, greatest city in America, right? And I love that.
Speaking of sarcasm, yeah, no, I'm doing it.
Well, is it because like so I live in San Francisco now, which is like I love this place, yet it's like hysterically troubled in so many ways. And I lived in Chicago for 23 years before that, and I'm from South Dakota, so I'm from none of these places. But my deep dish pizza kind of oozes out of my veins. I'm just like Chicago through and through, but also like a place with a lot of problems, but also like this beautiful place. Like, and you grew up there. Your dad taught music there. You're living at least in the region right there. So like Baltimore's like, and your music's like got Baltimore kind of baked into it, right? It's so like, how would you describe someone who never heard, like someone coming over from Europe who never heard of Baltimore? Like, how would you describe Baltimore? You're going to give them a tour. You're going to talk to them about the city. I remember doing that about Chicago when I would visit Germany, and people would ask and they'd say, "Oh, Al Capone," and it's like, no, but yes, a little bit. So
yeah, for me in Europe, it was The Wire. You would say you're from Baltimore,
yes,
and the only reference is The Wire.
Yeah,
and that there's a lot of truth to that show. I mean, I didn't watch this show for a long time because I felt like, why do I need to watch this show? It's all about Baltimore, and it's kind of takes place where I grew up, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But once I watched it, I was like, this is amazing. This is the most accurate depiction of what I remember Baltimore to be. And it's like they pulled stories straight out the headline. So yeah, it's funny when you say Al Capone, but you always get The Wire first.
Yeah.
But if I was to describe Baltimore to someone, wow, that is a very hard question. It's almost like, I feel like a lot of people think this in Maryland, like Baltimore's Baltimore, and then you have Maryland.
Sure.
It's like two different places. It's two different planets. It's completely different people. I know people who've never left Baltimore, grown people. But if I was to describe Baltimore, I would say it's almost it's like a microcosm of, I think, the country,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Because just like you can travel along this country, and the South is different from the North almost completely in some places.
Yeah.
In the Midwest, they have the ways they talk, the way they
Yep.
dress, what they do. I can't, like, I've been around a lot of places. In Baltimore, I think is that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the negatives associated with that traveling and the difference between people are exacerbated in Baltimore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it has some very beautiful sights and incredible history. I think
Yeah.
that's the value of that town. It has an amazing history, and it's often overlooked.
There is this mode in my practicing app, Modacity, which I totally love. It's called deliberate practice, and it's such a cool feature. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
One of my pain points as a musician was like not really having a method to generate reliable improvement. And deliberate practice is like the scientific method for music practice. So what you do is you identify the one thing that you want to improve, be it articulation, intonation, emotion, comfort, whatever it is you want to improve, and brainstorm or choose one of the pre-suggested strategies for that area of improvement, and then test it out. Record yourself trying that strategy, listen back, and press yes, it worked, or no, it didn't work, to create that improvement.
It's such a clean way of tracking your progress. I do it every day, and it has done wonders for my bass playing and just my overall enthusiasm for music. You got to check it out. Modacity.co is the site, and if you go to our site, you can click through it and get a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. I am so proud to have my course with Discover Double Bass, Beginner's Classical Bass, out in the world. This was a long time coming, friends, and this course is designed, as the name implies, for beginner bassists who want to learn how to play classical music, or for more experienced players who wish to revisit the foundations of technique. The course is comprised of 66 lessons over 4 hours and covers a wide range of topics on classical bass, which will make a real difference to you playing. It is the perfect course for beginners. I feel weird saying that since it's my course, but I definitely believe in it, to build a solid foundation of double bass technique and to help you feel confident playing. Many of the lessons include transcriptions of the pieces, exercises, and etudes, so you have everything you need to practice at home. I spent hundreds of hours putting this together over the last few years. I'm so glad to see it out in the world. We have a link to it in the show notes, or just visit discoverdouble.com/Jason Heath. Yeah, it's on that division of North and South, and that really interesting. It's not the South, but it's kind of the South. It's not the North, but it's kind. And I'm so glad you brought up The Wire, because I was actually I was going to ask you about that, because I love that show to death. And I think David Chase was a journalist in Baltimore, if I remember right. One of the show creator, one of the show. I think he was
David Simon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. David Simon. Yeah, right. I think he was a journalist in some capacity. So it's great. I've never asked anybody who lives in Baltimore about that show, but I mean, it's such a fascinating depiction of a place. Like, I've never found anything that I've been searching for something that captures Chicago like that. Shameless, the American version of Shameless, to an extent, is kind of accurate of South Side, or at least that part of the South Side Chicago. But yeah, it's so interesting how that show goes into, the issues with drugs, and then the docks, which I thought was really random, but so super interesting. And then education,
but
journalism.
Like, that's the thing. Like, if you saw season 1 and then saw season 2, and the characters are so different.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, it's just like this country. If you travel, 100 miles south, you think you're in another country if they weren't speaking English. It's the same thing. Like, how do we go from drug dealers and cops to fishermen and shippers? And, it's like, wow, this is the same city.
That's so interesting that's at that sort of nexus of thing. That's the thing about the United States that is, I think, particularly interesting. Like, if you take Montana and Miami, like, those aren't even remotely the same thing, right? Like,
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Wow. So I was your dad was in music, taught music, right, in Baltimore, and gigging musician too. And like you started trumpet at 4. Did I read that? That is, I think that's rare, at least to start.
And it doesn't sound like I started at 4. I still sound like I'm 4 on trumpet. My dad just retired.
Okay.
Because of the situation, pretty much. I
Yeah.
thought I would have to drag him out of school because he just loved it. It was his life. But being how these circumstances are, unfortunately, so you just got to make a decision, you know.
Yeah.
And he made that decision. I think it was the right decision, especially if he's listening. I 100% stand with you. But yeah, so my dad, I grew up in this household where, you know, jazz was playing all the time, music all the time. So I grew up like almost, I wouldn't say hate is a strong word, but jazz kind of was like, oh, all right, man, turn that stuff down a little bit. I've heard enough of it, you know. And I had this relationship where it was just, you know, music. And I had an older brother who was also a trumpet player, and he fell in love with it. So I'm growing up, I'm seeing my brother loves his music, my dad loves his music, and I got this sibling rivalry thing going on. Like, I don't want to deal with y'all. So, but it wasn't until I got to, so my dad put a trumpet in my hand at 4. My brother played trumpet too. And we, you know, my dad would teach after school programs, and he would also teach in high schools. But so we would always have to participate in its after school programs. So that's how I started so early. You know, why pay for daycare when I can teach my son trumpet?
Yeah.
So I would go to all the classes and play trumpet. Anyway, it wasn't until I got to high school. And then when I got to high school, there were no open trumpet chairs in the high school jazz band. And I had the impression through life that if I were going to eat every night, I had to be in the school band. So the only open instrument was the bass. And my dad was good friends with my high school music teacher. And he asked my dad, you think you can learn bass? He's like, oh yeah, Kris can do that. So that summer, my dad taught me bass. And the first lesson he taught me, I completely fell in love with the instrument. I mean, like, that became my life. I was into sports, drawing, comic books. The minute I picked up the bass, I realized what jazz was. I didn't know what jazz was until I picked up the bass. The whole concept of it, like, oh, these people are improvising and the bass players providing the harmony. How I was like, wow, this is way deeper than I thought. I just fell in love with bass. Wow. And it just took off from there. So it was all fate. Like, oh, nobody wanted to play bass in high school but me, and now it's it, you know.
Well, I think that's, you know, most of us who end up on bass, it's not like generally people they start their kid on piano or violin or a few other instruments, right. You know, but most of us, I think, kind of like fall into bass. I remember I was sitting around.
It's like, we need a bass player. Hey, get the tall guy. Him.
Yeah.
Get the guy with the long arms.
Yeah. Well, I was sitting around. I was at a bass conference a few years back, and I was sitting around a table, and we all just said, like, how did you get into bass? And one person said heavy metal. Next person, metal. And me too. It's like electric bass. My first band was Toxic Death. I was playing violin in middle school and wanted to quit. My parents wouldn't let me, and here I am. I don't even, you know. So it's interesting how we fall into it. But drawing, so it's really cool to see everything that you do, and just like the art. Like, so you were into drawing at a younger age.
Yes, that was my first love, drawing. I would sit and draw. I would. It's funny. As a kid, my parents would just sit me down in front of, I guess I can just call it NPR, public TV. And, you know, I would just sit there, and I remember seeing like Bob Ross. Remember that guy?
Oh, yeah.
I just remember, I used to love that guy. And that's pretty much why I started drawing, just watching NPR all day. And then I saw, that's the radio. I'm sorry. What is it? National
PBS, right?
PBS.
Yeah.
PBS, we would call it MPT, but I'm like, that's Maryland Public Television. So yeah, PBS. I always watch PBS all day. And then Bob Ross would come on. I fell in love. Like, I want to draw. So from that point, I would just sit and draw all day. And then I would go, as a kid, my dad would take me also to all his gigs. So I would be at all his gigs, drawing the band. It was just, that was my first love. And then the bass came and just swept that out of there.
Have you been into drawing ever since? Has that been, or did you like kind of have phases of doing more or less of it? I just think it's interesting, like something you pick up earlier in life, like, because at least for me personally, I have things and then I like leave them for a few years and then I get way into them again. I'm a constant like dilettante at a few different things, and I'm kind of rotating through. Has drawing been a constant for you, or? It
hasn't. And really, I mean it when I picked up that bass, it wiped everything out. Like everything. I used to play basketball every day. It just wiped everything out.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm in this situation, actually, the COVID, it's the first time I really sat down and started drawing again in years, probably a decade.
Oh wow! I was curious about that because also you've been writing. Yeah, I was going through what you've written. Had you been writing a lot before the pandemic started? I love your style of write. I'll link up to a bunch of posts for this, but like I really like just the way you express yourself in words as well. Is that something you'd been doing prior to this pandemic, or?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to write this blog way back in the day. Like, well, you know, because your blog's been up forever. I remember reading your blog. I went to visit it this morning. I was like, okay, it's a little different now. But I remember way back in the day. I don't know, how long have you been doing it? Because I remember
15 years at least. Yeah,
you know. Because I remember going to your blog and it was like 5 posts then.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Back in, I used to hang out at talkbase.com.
Oh yeah.
And I remember because we were starved. We still are starved. Mm-hmm. For like upright bass resources. But I remember back then that was like pretty much the only like upright bass blog that I ever really came across. But anyway, I used to write a blog when I started touring, and I wrote these incredible stories. And it only started because after a gig, and I think I was in Seattle, these filmmakers came up to us all to interview us. And they said, like, do you have a website, a blog? And I just answered yes to everything. I didn't have any of it. And I went to school for computer science. So I was like, I can make this. So, you know, I'll say yes. And I ran back to my hotel and created this whole website, stayed up all night and started writing blog and started doing blog entries and about our travels. And the next day I sent the link to the filmmakers and just started, you know, posting it everywhere. And had these huge amount of followers, complete strangers emailing me about, I love your blog. So I've been writing for a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love it. There are some parallels with that and how you got connected with Kenny Garrett too. I was just reading like you did. Can you tell the story of that? Because I think I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the question was, do you know my music? And the answer was yes, but the actual reality was no. And I got to go on a spelunking mission, right? Can you tell that story?
Yeah. A friend of mine, John Lampkin, called me. I was fresh out of college and my degree's in computer science. Like I studied music while I was in school, but I majored in computer science. And when I got out, I was doing the whole job hustle. I was still gigging like every night, but I was just doing the whole, all right, I got this degree, I better use it. But I started getting to the point where I was like, man, I don't know how much longer I can just run out every night and play this bass and live like this. But anyway, my friend calls me and he's like, hey man, are you working Saturday? And I was like, yeah, I already got a gig. He's like, oh, okay, well, I had this gig with Kenny Garrett, but you working? And he hangs up. I call him back like, what do you mean? Of course I can figure this out. Yes, I'm available. What you got? He goes, hold on. And he puts Kenny Garrett on 3-way. And then he's like, hello, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, oh my God, this is Kenny Garrett on the phone. So yeah, and he says, so yeah, man, you know my music? I was like, yeah, I know them all. He's like, you got my records? I was like, yeah, I got them all. I didn't have one. And I love Kenny Garrett. I just realized in that moment, I don't have any of his albums. But I said yes. And back then, this was 2002 maybe. Yeah, there was no Spotify. There was like, YouTube wasn't invented. So I hung up the phone and I called every person I knew who played an instrument in the city. And I drove around and tracked down all the CDs I could get. And I got pretty much his whole discography. And I sat up all night again, learning all this music, making my own charts. And then I had to go rehearse the next day. And that's when I met him. And then I toured with him after that for 4 years. So I guess the moral of the story is,
this episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. These are hand-built microphones out of Portland, Oregon, and they make an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. Barry Green got to try out this mic at our 2020 online bass summit where Ear Trumpet Labs was a sponsor, and he was singing its praises all weekend long. It's an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. It's durable and works with in-ears, monitors, you name it. Not to mention, Christian McBride, Barry Bales, and Missy Raines are all Nadine users. Whether it's classical, jazz, Americana, or bluegrass, this mic seriously delivers, and they're offering a free t-shirt, especially to Contrabass Conversations listeners with a purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out Nadine. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, and one of the things that struck me about Dorico when I first opened it up was this innovative user interface design. There are 5 different modes. There is setup, write, engrave, play, and print mode. And here is Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on why they set it up like this.
As they are presented to you on the screen, they're kind of there in a strip at the top left-hand corner of the screen, and they're very prominent. You can whack them with your mouse, or if you're using a Surface, you can tap them with your finger, and that basically then changes the whole UI of the program.
It is such an innovative design. It makes working for me so much cleaner in music notation software. I have become such a fan. I use this piece of software every single day. Check them out at Dorico.com. That'll take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And there's a free version, Dorico SE, that'll let you do practically everything the program does with up to 2 parts. So that's perfect if you're working with a student or making exercises or that kind of thing. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Dorico.
Say yes, figure it out later,
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a good lesson that people can learn. Can you imagine how different it must be for people coming up now with resources like Spotify? And because we're kind of from the same generation, I think. I remember my college job, work study job, was in the music library, and this was back in the day where I think this was in the early to mid '90s, late '90s. But the teacher would assign a recording to listen to, and the students would come. And I remember there was like a class that had to listen to Philip Glass, Einstein on the Beach. And so they'd have to write a number down and give it to me. And I'd go get I think it was a CD at that point, but I'd get it put on the CD for them, and they'd listen for 5 minutes, and they'd throw the headphone down and walk out, because no one can listen to Einstein on the Beach for more than 5 minutes. But I just remember how much work it took to listen. And even like the jazz collection of records. It was actually, it's a beautiful library at Northwestern, and at least at the time, the whole back walls, all the way around the music library, were nothing but jazz records. And I would go and I just alphabetical. You just like pour through everything, pull out all these Duke Ellington records, and pull out all these, Keith Jarrett. You name the artist, and look at that, and it's just like, man, this thing we have here is like the best and worst thing that's ever happened to me. But it's incredible, like how different it must be for people coming up.
Yeah, I always have this conversation with my students, and I understand, like you said, it's the best and worst, because I can look in their eyes and see it's overwhelmed. I had a student who was like, well, what do I listen to? And I'm like, what do you mean, what do you listen to? Like, what? And I realized, like, I would tell them to learn a tune, but back when they told me to learn a tune, it was like, okay, did Miles Davis do it? Did John Coltrane do it? Yeah. And then you started hunting, who wrote it? But now it's like you can literally type in a song and 1,000 versions of it come up, and the student will have no clue. So I remember I had a student, I won't name his name, but he would always go to like Sinatra. If Sinatra sang it, that was his record, which is cool. But in his brain, he's like, wow, how can you not get more famous than this? Has got to be the version.
Right.
So yeah, it is. I understand how overwhelming it is for them, but still, you have everything at your fingertips, and it's crazy to think about that.
But yeah, it's such a double-edged sword, because back when we were both growing up, I think like you had to have some skin in the game. I had to go buy that Coltrane album, or I had to go buy
too. Yes.
or at the very least go to the library and hope it was there and get it and have to return it without a fine. And it's and also just that physical nature of like holding something in your hands. Like I even think back to my metal days and like getting my Metallica cassettes at that point from it, and like actually opening up the liner notes
and reading the liner notes while the music play. Yeah, that is totally gone.
Yeah,
it's crazy you say that. My wife, who's she's a hip hop theater artist, and it's her idea. I'm not going to say we created it, but she had this idea years ago. We have this show called Liner Notes, and we take classic albums, because now you can't even find liner notes pretty much online. So we do these shows that are themed, and it's classic albums, and we'll play the songs live. It's a live band, singers, rappers, actors. We play the songs live, read excerpts from the liner notes, and connect them to other songs. Like if the song was sampled by a hip hop artist, we'll go from the original to the hip hop artist, all live, and read the liner notes. Because I mean, that experience like was amazing. Because I say I hated jazz, but like when my dad would put a record on, I would grab that cover. Yeah. I knew nothing about the music, but the visual, and then you read the back and you learn who these people are, and it's like, wow, it's like a movie, it's like a novel.
Yeah.
We're missing all of that.
Oh man, I love that you're doing that. Have been doing that as an event. What a great idea. And I can't remember who I was talking about with this, but those that are not like the rest of the band kind of gets lost in the shuffle in the digital age. You would see who is playing bass on these albums when you'd see those names, and if you listen to a lot, you'd see them over and over. And you can't even see the whole title of a tune most of the time on your phone, let alone like who is playing bass or drums or keys or on different tracks. So there's so much that's lost. I was talking to Linda O a couple weeks back about she and her husband, they have a small record label, and they've been doing this physical kind of fold out thing that you can buy that then has a digital download code. But it's pretty cool because it still has that physical nature. But man, that is something that I have missed that, and I mean, I'm such a digital person, the way I consume things is just so convenient, but you just sort of take it a little bit, it holds a little more gravity when there's a physical nature to it, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I like to look at it as it's the payment. That's the price you're paying, really. For the convenience, you're losing like a lot of that nostalgia and substance, but you're right, it's so convenient. How can you not just, I want to listen to some Mingus today, and you just, whoop, there it is. You don't have to go through the records or the CDs and, where's that record? You don't have to organize anything. You're just like, I'll just type it in.
Yeah.
Or I'll go, Alexa, play Charles Mingus.
I know. Yeah. It's crazy. But there's the beauty of that too, the convenience. And if you use it right, it's amazing. Have you been teaching online these past 6 months? I mean, I know. Okay. So I'd love to know, what's your experience been doing that? Have you seen any silver linings, maybe is a better question, to doing that? Because I know there are a lot of negatives. Like, man, do I wish I could just like move their bow or like demonstrate clearly without, but have you, what's the experience been like? And have you found it forces us all to kind of adapt? How's it been for you?
I did recognize the silver lining earlier because once this went down, I got a lot of inquiries for lessons. Mm-hmm. I will say you can reach anyone now. Yeah. So I think when the alternative of having a lesson in person is totally gone, I think that opens up to like, the world becomes smaller. So yeah, I've acquired at least 3 students since this started that I never met in person before. I still haven't, of course, but I think that's the silver lining. The world is becoming smaller. But yes, the negatives, oh man, especially early on with, I don't know about your experience, but with Zoom, playing like pizzicato bass and trying to like hear the sound and the note through the laptop. Yes. And then Zoom wants to background cancel and echo cancel. So the notes just disappear for a while. So I'm just finding myself now, I'm just watching left hands to get through some things like, whoa, he did the right fingering. I guess the sound came out. So that's been the struggle for me. But I mean, I'm enjoying it, honestly. I'm meeting a lot of new people, so it's cool,
Yeah, no, there's no sound.
I can't imagine though, like I teach a lot of jazz focused things. Mm-hmm. We're having a Zoom issue now, right?
Oh no, we're back. I think we're fine.
I do a lot of jazz. Okay, so I do a lot of jazz. I do pretty much only jazz focused teaching, but when I'm thinking about, like, I teach the bow too, but like intense classical, I can't imagine, because I took classical lessons all through college, and you need someone in the room with that thing sometimes, because and I can't, like, I'm not dealing with nothing serious probably as you are with the bow, and I'm like, wow, I can't even imagine, because I don't know how tall you are, I don't even fit on screen where you can see my right and left hand on my laptop unless I put it almost on the floor. I do my phone in portrait because it's the only way I can fit. You can see my left and right hand.
It's a huge...
But that and get the whole bow in?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge for bass teaching, I think, in particular, because how can you see I don't teach a lot personally. I have a couple students I've had for years, but I'm interested in what people are doing. I picked up this little device, the Zoom Q2N 4K, which is a mouthful to say, but it's got that sort of GoPro style angle, so really wide angle, and that seems to work. I can put it right behind my laptop, and it captures the whole bass, and it has a decent enough mic that I can hear, but there's no sound more horrible than a double bass through like an iPhone or iPad speaker. Yeah, you could barely make out anything. So it's rough for sure. Yeah, it makes him like, thinking about that bass quartet we were talking about earlier. Like, I'm not gonna take playing in public for granted ever again. I think about how all the things I was doing like January, February, I didn't even give two thoughts about. I was like, I'll go see the San Francisco Symphony, or I'm going to play this thing. Man, the next time I'm actually able to go like experience live music, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in terms of that, because I know people are thirsty for actually taking in something live.
Yeah, I used to complain all over social media. I actually a running joke about because in jazz mostly, when I'm touring, I play a different bass every night.
Yeah.
So like sometimes if you scroll through my Instagram, I like to take pictures of the most awful rental basses and just make like. I remember one of the funniest was like, this bass looks like it's made out of Werther's candy, like that shine and that brown. But now I'm like, man, I would kill to just play a really crappy bass somewhere in Europe right now. Like I would love to have to complain about a rental bass right now. But yeah, I totally understand that.
Yeah, well, that's such an interesting topic for me. Like us, it's even tough for a piano player if they're playing on a different, you're playing on a different piano every night. It's so different for us, if we get on a bass. Like, how do you manage? You get a piece of garbage, and I just, as someone who plays predominantly classical music, I think it's hard enough. But if I was doing something that had more improvisation to it, it seems to me like it would be even harder, because now like your ideas are being constricted by this thing that you can't navigate. Like what do you have any advice for people who are trying to do that, when they start touring again?
Yeah, I'm not a hugely religious person, but first pray. But yeah, you're almost like it's almost nothing you can control. But yeah. I used to get really upset about it. I would say the first thing is like, don't get upset, because that's going to make it worse, because you can't control it. Just do the best you can. But I honestly, like, early on, because it's gotten a lot better. When I started touring in 2003, I mean, like, I don't know when the Realist came out, but in 2003, I used to take my Realist around because there was no Realist pickup on the rental bass circuit. So you would get a rental bass and you wouldn't know what was on it. It would just sound like a bass from the 70s. It was some bass that sat in a music store window, wasn't set up, no adjustable bridges, But now it's gotten to the point now where it's like, everything becomes playable. Now, the sound of it might be terrible and it may look like something terrible, but back then, I mean, I remember playing basses that were almost physically unplayable. I've done gigs on 3 strings. I did a gig once where the sound post, I was on the wrong side, pickups on the wrong side. It's been a journey, I'm telling you. But I saw a really famous bass player once. We played before. I think we were somewhere, some island, I think, off of Italy or France. We were deep in Europe somewhere. Like, the bass was awful. And I played the gig, and after we finished, I saw him messing with the bass, and he basically pretty much just moved the bridge wherever he wanted it to be. and I talked to him afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, man, if they're not going to really provide you with a quality instrument, they're already telling you it's not a quality instrument. So treat it like it's not a quality instrument." And I was like, "Oh my God." But he sounded amazing, a lot better than me, and he looked a lot more comfortable. But
yeah, they might be doing future players a favor if that's the case. Well, right. If we ignore COVID times, like what percentage of the year were you on the road, like over the past few years? Has that increased, decreased? Like how often are you not at home?
I would say before this, I would say roughly about 30 to 35%.
Wow.
It's gone down, and I will say, I don't want to sound egotistical. Most of it's by choice.
Yeah.
But when I started touring, I was probably gone 60 to 70% of the time.
So that's super interesting. I loved it because talking to other people who have, playing more prominent gigs, like the sort of thing you're doing, that seems to be a trend. Is maybe over 50% of the time on the road, and then as your career develops, like consciously choosing to pull back. Why? Well, actually, maybe a better question is like, do you like being on the road, or what are some of the things that you enjoy? Because personally, I love and hate being on the road. Like I get inspiration, but it also like destroys me in some ways. What are your thoughts just about touring in general?
Yeah, I'm getting to that point. Before this happened, I was definitely on the edge of it was beating me down. I was definitely tired because I'd been doing it for almost 17 years.
Wow.
And in jazz, I don't know about classical. I'm probably really in classical. You end up going to pretty much the same places and performing in the same venues, but yeah, it became pretty tough later on. I think just like anything becomes a little monotonous. But I'll say in terms of jazz musicians like touring less as their careers progress, I'm learning that is a lot of the demand of touring, but also the actual pay you can command after you have a resume, because I'm definitely touring less and making more money as opposed to 70% on the road and not making the same money. So it's kind of like, all right, do I really want to fly to Korea and then Paris to make the same money if I just flew to Chicago this weekend? Like that kind of happens a lot now, Well, I remember one time in Europe, we did a whole tour of Europe, and I think instead of paying for like 3 nights of a hotel in Europe, we flew back home for 2 days and then flew back.
Wow.
Right. Like that kind of thing. I couldn't do that anymore. I would be just like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do this. Sorry.
Well, how do you handle? Because I've done in a very different capacity. I've done a lot of travel. I was just in Australia a few months ago, which is a whopping flight.
Yes.
Probably even more so for you because you get the additional hours. But do you have any? How do you manage your time? Do you just zone out? Do you try to do some work or write or do anything? Because it's tough. And then if you're borrowing basses, you don't even have an instrument until the gig. Like, how do you? And if you're spending a percentage of your time on the road like that, whether it's 30 or 60%, like how do you keep developing your craft? Like, I'd just be fascinated to know how you handle your time in terms of that.
No, it's very difficult. And one good thing about now is I'm actually getting to practice and feel myself progressing, because when you're working like that, you don't really have time to really progress. And sometimes like I would get an instrument in my hand finally being on the road, and from sound check to the gig, I just want to play bass and I'm just playing and practicing. Then the gig happens and I'm totally out of gas. Like that happens a lot because you just want to play an instrument. But when I first started touring, I'm young and dumb. No, it was like, we fly in like, all right, where are we going? We're going to party. I'm going to see everything. And you do the gig. Then it's like, all right, I'm going to go out. And then we're going to go out. And then, that's why I was blogging. It was such an amazing time to write about. Now it's like, all right, which hotel? All right, I'm going to sleep. When is sound check? Okay. Sound check's over. When do we eat? All right, I'm going to sleep. Oh, the gig's now. Do the gig and back to sleep. Like now it's just like, it's like I'm trying to preserve my life. Survival.
Man, is that blog up anywhere? I would love to read that blog.
I had to take it down because it was very personal, and like the people I was basically writing about, the people I was touring with.
Yep.
So I did take it. I probably could get away with putting it back up, but it's some very funny stories.
Okay, I would love to read that. I remember I learned going back to like my blogging history, I learned the disadvantages of writing in public. I wrote a story about the Grant Park Symphony and auditioning for it, and this weird thing that happened, which then became on the front page of Google for years for the Grant Park Symphony. So you look up Grant Park Symphony, it'd be this like some sort of goofball story. So I actually wrote about a conductor, and the title of the blog post was "Falling Off the Stage," and this guy, which I wrote about him very glowingly because he was actually doing a rehearsal and he was on the podium and he was leaning on the back. It was one of those podiums with like a bar on the back, and he was leaning and talking, and then the bar broke off and he fell off into the audience and literally did a backflip, landed in the orchestra, and kept instructing the orchestra. It was like this guy's Batman. And so I wrote about this, and then he was a guest conductor. Fast forward a few years, he becomes the music director of this orchestra I was playing in. He gets up, first rehearsal, he says, remember the last time I was here, I fell off the stage? Yeah, my mother learned about that. You know why? Because somebody blogged about it. And the whole orchestra looked at me.
Did he know it was you? He was just playing.
No, I don't think he knew it was me, but the whole orchestra knew. And it was funny because it had been so many years that everybody's looking at me, and I thought, I'm sure I must have been the one, but I had no memory of even writing about it. So I told my wife the story, and she looks it up on her phone, and she says, well, there's this blog post called Falling Off the Stage. So
wow. No, I had the same thing. I was writing a friend, like me and the drummer in the band were really close friends, and we would travel. And I remember coming down we got to the gig, and I remember being in baggage claim, and he turns to me and he's like, yo, man, I saw what you wrote about me in your blog. And I was like, all right, I need to dial it in. But honestly, I will say, the reason I stopped is because I started dating my wife, and I was like, I do not want her to see all this stuff.
But it's been really cool to see what you've been writing, like since you I think your first post was in June, maybe, if I remember right. At least what's up on your blog.
I started writing on Medium. I have a friend of mine, Andre Guest, who's been like a writing mentor to me, because I've always loved writing. Like in high school, I did a lot of writing. I always wanted to be like a novelist, but the bass. Yeah. And he and I would have these, arguments all the time over the phone, and he just was like, man, you need to write more. People need to hear your opinion, your voice. You have a nice perspective, a way of putting things. So he's been like trying to coach me up, So he was like, he introduced me like, just write on Medium. You'll reach more people. And then I just I think I wrote 3 articles on there so far, and it's been great. I mean, I got one article I wrote about black beans. I read that. Yeah. That actually got chosen on Medium for some homepage. I'm not even sure how Medium works, but apparently that one got a good review from somebody and was put on a homepage of some Medium site. So it's been cool.
And had you been? I've checked out a bunch of what you put out on Instagram too, and it's super cool. And you've got like a merch store going and everything with you. Had you been doing a lot visually prior to the pandemic, or is that something you sort of kicked up again?
That all started with the pandemic. Like, it's funny. Like, I think like that void of creativity in my brain from not being able to play out, I just needed something to fill it. And I watched somebody on YouTube, I think, drawing on an iPad. And I was like, I'm gonna get an iPad. And then I just started drawing, and I got back into drawing. I mean, and that took off. And then I started doing that, and then like, you feel one part of the brain, and you see a little hole there, and you gotta get something else, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna start writing. So it all kind of together. I'm in the process of trying to figure a way to fuse all this stuff together. That's just the way my brain works.
Well, I can't wait to see you continue to do that, because I think it's super interesting working in different mediums. Like I relate to that in a different way. I don't do much visually, but a little bit, but video and audio and writing and bass playing and a little bit of arranging and everything, and it's all like that same part of the brain, whatever that is, that creative part. Do you I just love to know how, I think it's really interesting how people work. Like, do you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to draw now, I'm going to write an article now, or does this like inspiration strike, or like how do you deal with your, and I'm sure it's different now that you have probably more time than you typically would being on the road, but like how do you organize your creativity or your creative time much? No, it just happens. Okay.
Yeah, I'm really bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD. I'm not 100% sure, but like if you saw me work, your mouth would drop. I do things like, I don't want to move anything because I'll mess up the recording, but I literally have keyboard here, iPad here, PlayStation, electric bass, like everything. So I'll sit down, I'm like, I'm gonna play a little piano today. And I'll be in the middle of it. I'll literally something will pop in my brain. And next thing you know, I'm writing a 3-page essay on something, or I'm drawing something or creating a t-shirt for my merch.
I love that.
But I know that I've gotten to the point now, especially now, where I know whatever I'm sitting down to do is not what I'm going to end up completing. and I'm at peace with it, because I know, all right, something's going to happen here.
Yeah. I love that. Well, when do you sit down? Are you a morning person? Are you a night person? Is it just sporadic, or when do you typically do that?
I would say I lean towards morning.
Okay.
especially my writing. I'll be in bed, wake up, and my brain will start moving. I'm like, I gotta write this down, and I'll immediately shoot down and type. Or I'll hop right out the bed, and after brushing my teeth, I'm playing scales all morning. Like the morning is definitely when I'm ready to go. Because, yeah, I get tired after about nowadays. I get tired after about 4. My day's over.
Good. I'm the same way. I'm glad to hear I got a kindred spirit. I get up. I've learned over the years my best hours are like 8 a.m. to noon, and then I'm just never quite. I can do things in the afternoon. I'm never quite as good. By 4 p.m., I'm relatively useless. And if I have to do something, and that's what it's funny because in more regular times, I sub with the San Francisco Symphony fairly regularly, which I love to do. But I'm also like, oh man, I gotta stay up till 7 p.m. for a concert. or some of my freelance musician friends, again, in more normal times, they say, hey, let's meet up for a drink. How about 10 p.m.? And I think, oh, man, I have to set an alarm for 9:30 p.m.
Exactly. I'm right with you. If I don't have a bass in my hand by like 8, it's over. I'm gone. See you tomorrow.
When did that start for you? Because, I mean, when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I was up till 2 a.m. every day. I was living the life of a jazz musician, even though I wasn't playing very much jazz. Were you always that way, or has that been more of a recent thing?
No, I'm trying to think. I actually think it has a lot to do with, I got a dog like 10 or 13 years ago. He just passed away. Rest in peace, Mingus.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I think that was it. Having to get up at 7 because he's jumping on you every morning to walk, and then having to walk him again after dinner. I think you just start getting tired and you start aging faster.
Yeah.
So I think I would say right around when I got a puppy, that'll do it to you.
Yeah.
But don't you feel so much better when you've accomplished everything before noon? Like when I got that, it's like a glow. I walk through the day like, I can do whatever I want now.
I know. I think of it as early wins. Getting some early wins in the day. There's General Stanley McChrystal, I think is his name. And actually, speaking of a dog, my dog is right here wanting to walk, jumping up on me. So almost pulled my audio interface off. But that General Stanley McChrystal, every day he wakes up and makes his bed, and that's his first win. You make your bed, it's like the easiest win. And I listened to that on a podcast, and I started doing that. And then you get to the end of the day, you got a made bed to get into, and like just early wins. And I feel so much better when I get that, whether it's writing or bass or something. Yeah, done in the day. Yeah, hit noon. It's such a better way versus like wake up and it's 10 a.m. and I kind of like laze around, put on some Netflix show. Yeah,
you feel worthless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then 7 comes around and is like, I didn't practice. No, and then you're rushing to go practice, and then it gets ugly.
Yeah, it's I was doing a online event last week, and a question was posed to me, and I'd love to pose this question to you because I did not feel like I answered it well. But it was music educators mostly, and they were saying they've noticed. I think every generation complains about the current generation. It's like kids these days, they have nothing going on. We can go back, so kids these days, they aren't curious like they used to be. And what we were talking about with like Spotify and YouTube and just being able to access anything at a drop of a hat and almost like the overwhelm of that, I think there might be something to that. It's like there's so much. What do I even do? And so their question to me was like, how do you encourage young people to be more curious, whether in music or anything? And I don't remember what I said, but I remember it wasn't that good. If we swapped places, do you have any thoughts on that? And I know it's kind of a rough topic, but
I'm not sure about how successful this has been, but and also I'm teaching jazz mostly, so the easy part I have is I can take what a kid likes, what type of music a kid likes. You can do this for almost any form of music with jazz, and relate it back to why you should be, studying this or checking this out. And to check this out will lead you everywhere else. If a kid tells me he wants to. I talked to my student the other day, and I was like, "What are your goals? Like, what type of music? Describe to me your music." And after I broke down his whole "I'm talking to my teacher" thing, he just laid down some examples and mixed it all up. And it sounded crazy, but I was like, learning these triads will really get you there. That kind of thing where so I have a kind of an advantage, but like, I just think about my own journey and how I was curious, and you just need that spark. And I was like, you just got to find that spark. For me, it was like connecting jazz to hip hop. When I realized like these things are really related, I was just trying to constantly fill in this gap. Why are they here? When I was like, all this, I want to swim in this. So I try to spark that. So if a student tells me like, I don't really like standards, I like this music. Well, I'm like, I need to deal with this, this area between the music you like and the music of dead people, and try to get you to swim in this place. Because honestly, if you're swimming in this place, you'll find new things, especially about yourself, So that's how I try to spark the curiosity. But that is a very hard thing to do now, because they're overwhelmed. I mean, you have everything at your fingertips. Why do you have to look for anything? And if you can't find it, somewhere is being paid a lot of money to throw it in your face.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Here's a totally random question, but I was thinking about, like, did you ever have a point in your life when you thought about not living near Baltimore? Because like me, I'm from South Dakota. I've never thought about moving back to South Dakota. That's, sorry, Mom. My mom won't allow me to say disparaging things about South Dakota. So I'll leave it at that. It's great. Many good things about the place. Chicago, I never thought I'd live in San Francisco. Did you ever think about, relocating for any particular reason? I mean, I know you like got Baltimore baked into your music, but I'm just curious.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I wanted to leave the house at 18, move to New York, and become an international jazz star. And my mom is like, no, you aren't. So no, I've always been wanting to. And honestly, I actually had to, when I moved out of Baltimore, there was basically like, I'm pretty much in DC now.
Yeah.
And when I made that transition, I mean, DC was almost like New York to me, because the gap between places to play and the amount of musicians in Baltimore compared to DC at that time, I thought this was like, okay, this will do. And so it's almost like I did move out of Baltimore because I had to, because there's just nothing, to sustain myself. And I hated driving an hour for a gig all the time that paid better, and I actually played in front of people, a lot more people. So I had to move for those reasons. And when I got going in my career, I was, Kenny Garrett told me to move. I should move to New York. Everybody was like, you should move to New York, blah, blah, blah. I lived in New York for about 3 days. And I just couldn't. The epiphany was going to the gig, getting out the subway in the middle of what felt like a Category 3 hurricane with an upright bass and just pouring. I'm like 23 years old, and I'm literally breaking down in tears. And I'm like, I can't do this. I just can't. So, you just gotta find your way, I guess, But I'm now, things are different, man. I don't know what this world's gonna look like after this. And it seems scary, but I'm kind of like excited to see what happens, because I know, we're gonna need music. So I'm just excited to see how different it'll be.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see what happens with like the smaller venues. We'll say like here in San Francisco. It's not like San Francisco was functioning super awesome before the pandemic, to be frank. Anyway, gigantic problems, and one of the many problems is like which I know is a problem in DC too, is just like housing costs and gentrification. Right, And I mean, it's just like a giant, and like you're watching every club disappear. I'm like the only bassist living in San Francisco now. It's just because my wife is in another profession, and I so we can make it work. But like everybody's moved to Oakland, and now nobody can live in Oakland because it's too expensive. Yep. And watching the last couple jazz clubs close up shop here, or creative music venues. I haven't put it on the podcast yet, but I will, with a bassist in DC named Luke Stewart, who does many things. He's on and he was telling me a little bit about the scene there, and I know you may have some overlap, but probably a lot of differences in terms of where you've played. Like what? I don't know much besides what Luke shared with me about the jazz scene in DC. It sounds like it's got a great legacy, and there are some great venues. What's the scene there like for folks who might not have checked out music there?
No, DC actually, it's of course like everywhere else. I think now only maybe one or two. We only have one or two dedicated jazz clubs left. We've lost about 3, I think, this year. And we just lost Twins Jazz, which has been around forever. maybe a couple of weeks ago. They just shut down.
Oh man.
But yeah, when I first came here, when I went to Howard, so I came here in like '98, and it was amazing. I could work every single night. I was going to school. I had 21 credits. I'm studying computer science. I'm going and doing the gig every night. I'm doing homework on the breaks, and it was amazing. And U Street, which is like pretty much like was like Black Broadway back in the day, but when I got here, U Street was just this corridor of like every restaurant had music. Like you could walk down the street and see 5 or 6 different bands just playing in the window. And it was thriving and amazing. And unfortunately, compared to like the Mecca, like New York, where it's just so many musicians and you get a lot of like crabs in a barrel mentality. In DC, I've never really seen that. It's always like support, hang, it's like a family. It's pretty much a loving atmosphere. But I will say about Luke, like I love that dude to death. He's heard me say this before, but like Luke running his Capital Bop thing, and they just make pop-up concerts everywhere in the city, but they just they give musicians an infrastructure just to be seen, you know?
Yeah.
And the first time my band ever performed was at a Capital Bop event. And I played in a room that was just completely packed. Like I'd never done a show before. No one in there probably knew who I was. And they probably weren't huge jazz fans. But I got to just perform in front of these people because Luke and that organization just put that out there and, you know, gave you the infrastructure to put a crowd in front of you and then the opportunity to just feed your music to people. But I would say the best thing about the DC jazz scene is just, I don't know who started it, who made this edict, but it's always been like a family, you know. That's the great thing. But now we unfortunately don't have a lot of places to play. We play in mostly now bars and hole in the walls. But the good thing, I'll say, this club that closed a while ago, where I pretty much learned how to play there. It's called Cafe Nima. Like a lot of these places in DC, I think that made everything so amazing here is the owners are a lot of times invested in the music too. And I remember at Cafe Nima, we could literally play anything we want, as loud as we wanted to. We could do whatever we wanted to do in there, and the owner would love it. You know, a lot of places now it's like, shh. You know, you're there to be seen, so they can charge a little more for the meal. You're not supposed to be like. We could explore. We would literally show up without music and just go for it. And you know, I'd show up with an effects pedal or amp the size of me. You can do whatever you want, and that's the kind of environment also that, you know, Luke and they like to provide. But it's like, I think in DC you have a lot of freedom to do whatever you want, and I think that's a good plus about DC.
Yeah, I love the venue. You know, I saw a lot of live jazz in Chicago. I lived near the Jazz Showcase, which is this kind of the flagship
Chicago.
venue. Yeah,
now that Chicago, like for me, I feel like in the country, I like Chicago. Like Chicago is one of the last places I hope nobody comes for me in this country that truly still has like they have their own sound, their own vibe, and the musicians there. You just know that if you go to Chicago and you meet a musician from Chicago, you know you're getting a really, really well-rounded musician who just doesn't have like boundaries. Like you can go to Chicago and sit down here and jazz and won't know what you're gonna hear.
Yeah, no, it's one of those places. It's big enough to have a scene. It's got the heritage and everything. It's funny because talking to Luke, I was realizing the parallels between DC and San Francisco. Actually, we're actually relatively the same size. We're constrained geographically in some ways. There are quite a few parallels. But Chicago, definitely has a few venues that have the Jazz Showcase certainly, and then the Green Mill up on the north side of Chicago is like classic. It looks like you're stepping back into the 20s.
It's like a movie,
yeah. That place, I will be depressed for a long time if anything happens to that place. But that's one of my favorite. Used to be still not the best neighborhood, but it used to be like super grungy, quasi dangerous back when I was in college. So you go to the Green Mill, but you watch your back, you know, as you get off the train. But what a cool place to take in music. What are some of your? I think it's super interesting, especially for people like you who've traveled like you have. What are some of your favorite places to play, either in the U.S. or abroad? Like I remember going and playing in Japan and just thinking like, what's going on? It's such a different experience. Or playing classical music in Germany, like playing Beethoven in Germany feels so different from Chicago, where like half the people are coughing and getting up and leaving. Sorry, Chicago, but it's true. Like what are some of your favorite places to play?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. I I recognize early that the difference between like America and overseas is like here we're musicians are entertainers here, especially in jazz. It's like they look at the music as entertainment, like entertain me. Where you can go overseas and it's like you're an artist. And I remember one of the most eye-opening things for me was the first time I played in Paris, and I forget what club I was in, but you could hear a pin drop during the whole show, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, they hate us. But they're literally like, they feel like sometimes they're watching painters paint, and they feel like they don't want to disturb you. But I'm so used to, like, you can walk in a club in Baltimore, like the Caton Castle, shout out to Caton Castle, and if you play a blues in there, it's almost like a football game. I mean, people are literally like, yeah, like you play a cool blues lick, and it's like you just hit a 3-pointer. And so I'm used to that energy, right? And to feel like you're a painter painting, and it's like, and then you're done, and like, oh, but when the song starts, they're like, you can hear a pin drop. It's like, it's just a different way of things. Yeah. And I still prefer the people screaming at me while I play. So my favorite place is probably, let me think, Poland loves music. I think some of the most energetic crowds I've ever played in front of was in Poland, if you can believe that. And the Netherlands, like the North Sea Jazz Festival, Holland, like Rotterdam and Amsterdam, great crowds. The New Morning in Paris, you'll always get an incredible crowd there, despite what I just said. In the States, that's tough because it's not a lot of clubs anymore. Wow. I always loved the club in Minnesota. I think that was more because it's such a beautiful room. What is it? The Dakota Jazz Club.
Oh, is that in Minneapolis or?
Minneapolis, right.
Okay, cool.
I hope that's still around, but I used to love playing that room. I'm sure. I always loved playing in Detroit. Yeah, definitely love Detroit, Chicago. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's the biggest difference, America and overseas. But I would rather, if I could take the crowds from Poland, put them in America, that would be my treat.
Yeah, I still haven't been to Poland. I'm Polish. I'm more Polish than anything, so I gotta get there someday just for my heritage. But I
bring a coat.
Yeah, well, that's why. And actually, where I'm from in South Dakota, a lot of Polish people are there, and I've heard it's because it's a very similar climate. Extremely cold. But
yes,
man, I love what you do. I thank you so much for hanging out with me and doing this. I'll send people to your website, your social media, anywhere else, your Bandcamp page, certainly. Anywhere else you want me to send folks, or
that's all I got, I think.
That's plenty. So, and I would love to chat again if anytime you got anything coming up, a new album or anything at all. I've had people on 6, 7, 8 times before, so it's I'd be thrilled. So just if you'd be down, I'd love to make it happen.
Oh, definitely, please.
Kris, you rock. Thank you so much. Folks, check out everything's up to at his website, Fundamentals, and that's with 2 N's, just like his name. And you can just check out the show notes for links to that, his social media, Cornerstore, all the things that we talked about. And yeah, thanks for checking this one out. I can't wait to see Kris in person one of these days. I can't wait to see you in person one of these days. Dear person listening to this podcast, if this is your first time listening, welcome. Thank you for checking this out and staying till the end, where for the last few months I have just told myself no editing, Jason. So this is just turn on the mic and go. Doesn't matter if the dog pees on the floor during the middle. I'm just gonna keep going. I don't think I've edited one of these outros in the last 6 months or so, which is probably why they're so bloody long. I have been doing a lot more editing though for the Contrabass Conversations YouTube channel. I've been really doubling down on that and taking it seriously and working on my video chops. And I've been giving myself a challenge, which is let's try to do the dumbest possible thing I can think of. Let's make Dragonetti talk. Let's make Kusevitsky a demon, all these sort of things. And I keep waiting for the negative feedback and I never get it. So that makes me know that though I think that I'm doing things that I'm trying to think like, what's the dumbest thing I can think of? And then let's try to do that on YouTube within reason. And I seem to be challenging my perceptions of what's dumb or not. Okay. Boy, that's a ramble, Jason. Okay. What what is going on here? It's today is the day before Thanksgiving here in the United States. In more normal times, I'd be doing something, but we just have our little tofurkey loaf from Trader Joe's that my wife and I are going to eat. That's our traditional Thanksgiving when it's just us. I am not a vegetarian. She is, so it makes turkey eating a little bit hard. So I just eat the tofurkey loaf. I actually kind of enjoy that. Probably more dog walks and working more on videos. I am doing research for a Kusevitsky video that I think I got a good idea on that. And I'm finding myself, instead of just watching TV or watching YouTube at night, I'm actually breaking out the iPad, downloading articles about now Kusevitsky, watching all these videos, and kind of getting more into research mode, I guess I'll call it. And that's been oddly fun. It's really strange. I usually just zone out after 5 p.m., don't obligate myself to do anything. Maybe I'll make a little music now and again, but I'm finding myself really dialed in and ordering these source texts for about bass and bass history. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just 9 months of being shut in, mostly with myself, and now just me and the dog. Maybe that's what's spurring it on. But I'm really having a fun time doing this research, and I'm trying to think of a name for this series. I've only done this Dragonetti video at the time of recording this, but I think it might be like, who were these people or something like that. I'm just going to go through some of the bigger composers, then maybe some obscure composers, some of the performers, probably get into some contemporary performers, composers. If you have any ideas for me in this project, shoot me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com, or hit me up on social media. Email is probably better because that goes directly to me. It goes through a more circuitous path if you do it via social media. Thanks again for listening. I better exit this outro and thank the team who puts these episodes together. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, Krista Copper. The theme music you've heard on this episode, and for years and years and years, ever since episode 15 of the podcast, that's Eric Hochberg jamming out on the double bass. He and I just recording some stuff at his place back in Evanston, Illinois. EricHochbergmusic.com, I believe, is the website. Let me click that to EricHochberg.com. Check him out. He does great work and is a super cool guy and interesting musician. I am your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.